Consider Professor Xavier from the X-Men or Toph Beifong from Avatar: The Last Airbender. These characters are powerful, compelling, and arguably some of the most interesting characters in modern media. There's one more thing that these two characters have in common. They are both fantastic examples of how a character with a disability can be a compelling addition to a story. Today, we're going to be doing part 2 of my series on disabilities and storytelling on this episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello travelers and tourists, my name is Mark and I am the Local Disaster Tour Guide. Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of RPGs such as Pathfinder and Starfinder. Today we are doing part 2 in a video series on the subject of disabilities and storytelling. In the last few months in the gaming community, I've seen a lot of conversations surrounding the idea of inclusion for people with disabilities, both at our gaming tables and also in the stories that we tell. Now, when I'm out and about in the real world, I actually work for a nonprofit that serves people with disabilities, and that means that this is a subject that is very close to my heart. So I decided to do a video series on the intersection between these two aspects of my life, disabilities and storytelling. Now, we've already done part 1 of this series, which was a video on the subject of understanding disabilities, and if you haven't seen that video yet, I'll throw a link up here. You should definitely go and check that out. But today, we're going to be looking at the storytelling side of the equation, and we're going to be asking the question, how can we use characters with disabilities in our stories to improve the stories that we tell? There are many examples of fictional characters that have disabilities that bring a lot of excitement and interest and complexity to the stories that they are a part of, and I think that characters with disabilities can improve the stories that we tell in our tabletop RPGs as well. The inclusion of characters with disabilities is definitely a step in the right direction, but it does naturally raise the question, how do we use these characters well in our stories? So that's going to be the topic for this video today. However, before we dive into that topic, there are a few elements of housekeeping that I want to take care of really quick. Number 1, I have a correction from my previous video in this series. In my previous video, I mentioned the combat wheelchair, and I said that that was an official part of the Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition rule set. I was incorrect when I said that. That is actually a very popular homebrew set of rules, and those rules were put out by a Twitter user by the name of Mustang's Art. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to try to throw a link in the description for this video so that if you're a D&D 5e player and you are interested in the combat wheelchair and the homebrew surrounding that, that you can go and check that out. And my apologies for not giving the proper attribution in the previous video. I don't follow D&D 5e as closely as I do Pathfinder, so I got that mixed up. My apologies on that front. Number 2, for those of you who might not be aware, if I have any channel updates, I will be putting those at the end of my videos after the credits for any of the videos that I do. So do be on the lookout for any post-credit scenes that I might have to offer for this channel. And I will go ahead and tell you there is going to be a post-credit scene today, and I am pretty excited about what I get to share. So I definitely encourage you to stick around or maybe jump ahead and take a look at that because I'm pretty happy. And last but not least, before I dive into the full topic in this video, I wanted to give some space to some other people to be a part of this conversation on disabilities and storytelling. So I actually reached out to a couple of other content creators for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and ask them to kind of share their thoughts on the subject of disabilities in storytelling, inclusion both at the gaming table and also in terms of characters in our stories.
G'day guys, my name's Michael and I'm the Dead Aussie Gamer. I'm a professional Twitch streamer, YouTuber and role player from Perth, Western Australia. Over the last 6 years, I've had the absolute pleasure of being a professional game master for the Australian government, running a variety of different tabletop role-playing games for young adults in my local area, as well as establishing a bunch of programs like mine across Australia. In that period of time, I've played a number of games with young people who live with special needs or those who live with disabilities. And in that time, I've got to say, I've had an absolutely magical journey. Being able to play with a variety of different people has always been a true pleasure of mine, and those with special needs and disabilities are no different. So communication and understanding is such an important and heavy part of any role-playing game you sit at, regardless of the players that make up that table. There are so many different techniques and methods of being able to learn and understand each of your different players that I don't think there's any video out there on the internet that could ever cover all the different combinations of types of engagement you would have. But I've got to say this. When you sit down and play games with people that have special needs or you know who require that little bit of extra attention, there is something really magical happening because almost in front of you, you can witness the growth, the happiness, the well-being, the joy of someone really getting into and embracing role-playing games. One of my favorite stories was a young adult who came to my youth center and wanted to join role-playing. I was informed by their carer that they would not be able to read, they would not be able to write, they would not be able to do mathematics, that they did not touch paper, and that they struggled to communicate. They were also very, very anxious. And with all of these things together, I thought to myself, like, initially, like, are you sure role playing is where they want to be? I mean, that's crazy. That's a lot, right? Because what is role playing without all of these things? So it got me thinking about like really how much role-playing games can provide to people, and I thought, you know what, let's try this. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's be as understanding, as patient, and as welcoming as we can be, because that's the vibe I'm always trying to bring to people. So we did. We brought this young person in. We taught them some of the basics and of how to role play, and I discovered something. All their life, this young person had been telling themselves, I live with a disability. I cannot do these things. I simply can't. Even the concept of attempting something and failing was so cripplingly frightening that they just simply didn't bother. The first few games were rough. They were. There was no way to effectively allow them to be able to communicate and play. They spoke perfectly fine, but they could not interpret the world around them. So I had one of the other players helping them out and playing alongside them, running their characters almost simultaneously to help them sort of get an idea for the game. And they loved it so much, they came every single week. Each week, I would take a moment, maybe a half an hour before each game, to sit down with that young person and talk them through a little bit more of their character. Eventually, getting to a point where I was helping them out with tactile learning through mathematics, sort of having objects for them to be able to count on and to read, through being able to help them understand exactly how to phonically say these words that were on their sheet and what they meant. 1 year later on, this young person comes every single week. Although a little slower than the others, can read, can write, can do maths. In fact, he's one of the better role players at the group at the moment. He's even starting to help the people around him as well. And for me, I didn't, the growth of that is just so slow, and so little that until you go back and reflect, you don't really see all that happening, but it's magic happening right in front of you. If I had to say anything in regards to working with people who have disabilities, who might require a little bit extra attention, it would be this. Role-playing is a connected community. We're all here because we have something we wish to express. We want to create. We want to be around these people who share that love of storytelling, of fantasy, and of adventure. And those people who are patient, those people who are understanding, will always have the most rewarding experiences. Absolutely, 100%. And as a GM, there is nothing greater than being able to share the magic that you receive when you run your game to other people as well. Yeah, that's me. Thank you.
So inclusion is a huge thing in the TTRPG universe, or like life at large right now, right? In the world in which we live, it's so important for people from all walks of life to be able to, go do the thing for fun and put down life's stressors for long enough to, stab monsters with your friends. And disabled inclusion, obviously, right up there. This was the part of the video where I was going to like twirl my insulin around. In case you didn't know, I'll just say it here. Hi, my name's Tommy from Black Dragon Gaming. I am a type 1 diabetic. I have a disability. And sure, if I was born in Pathfinder land, I theoretically could become a cleric or worshiper of some deity and like restoration it off. But I myself have to deal with that every day, even if my character gets a free pass, which also would be lazy writing and hand waving a thing that's important. But that's a whole different point. In Pathfinder's adventure paths, it's real hard to swing a dead displacer beast without landing on, especially the farther forward you go, something that is great representation. After talking to some of my community, after sitting with it by myself for a while, I definitely thought we were going to come into this and talk about like Wrath of the Righteous, because truly Wrath of the Righteous subverts all the tropes, has a bunch of great examples of representation across the board, and you get to play mythic stuff. It's like the coolest adventure path out there. Everyone wins, except the GM, who doesn't win because they have to balance mythic. But I digress. Today I want to highlight from Ironfang Invasion 1, Oberyn the Green. Why, you might ask? Oberyn was blinded by an Ankeg and has that debuff, but that's not, and as you might imagine, has penalties for targeting things farther away from her. Eventually things get concealment, so on and so forth. She also was born without a foot, and it literally says that. And in the last paragraph of her entry in Trail of the Hunted, Book 1 of IFI, her missing foot is a condition of birth that has never slowed her down, and is not reflected in her stat block. Here we have an example of someone whose conditions of living are different than everybody else's, and yet they are not mechanically penalized for it, because they've been living with it for their entire life. Oberyn being, I want to say in her early 30s, something like, which normalizes the fact that she's different than everybody else. And the closer we get in representation of these things to normalize, oh, that person's different, the closer we get to not fixating on it IRL and just treating people like people, which seems to be the best practices here. Anyway, I've rambled. Let me give you back to your mans. Thanks for having me, buddy.
Thank you, Dead Aussie Gamer, and thank you to Tommy from Black Dragon Gaming. I really appreciate you guys, and I really appreciate these stories that you were able to share. So now, let's get to our main topic for this video. How can we use characters with disabilities to tell stronger stories at our gaming table? Now, if you have seen my previous video in this series, you know that the #1 rule for portraying characters with disabilities well is to create a character, not a caricature. A caricature happens when we create a character with a disability and the entire character is their disability. That's the only concept that we have for them. They become a cardboard cutout that is entirely defined by a single aspect of who they are, the disability that they have. In the real world, a person is more than just their diagnosis, and that is true of the characters in the stories that we tell as well. So the principle of using characters with disabilities to tell stronger stories is to find ways to use that aspect of the character to flesh out the character and help that character become more well-rounded, more developed, and more interesting or engaging in the story. Now, there are many different tactics that you can use here, but I'm going to cover 4 specific tactics that you can use that I think lend themselves to telling better stories. I call these tactics the reminder, the support, the challenge, and the purpose. In each instance, what I am doing is I am using the character's disability to highlight or develop another aspect of that character. I may be highlighting their relationship or their goals or their backstory, but in each case what I am trying to do is I'm trying to enhance one aspect of the character through the disability that the character has. Now, before we dive too deeply into these, I do want to go ahead and say each of these tactics can be done badly. It is very possible to use any of these tactics or other storytelling tactics to create very one-note or very harmful caricatures of people with disabilities, and we do want to be cautious of that. I don't have time to deep dive every way these tactics can go wrong, but that's why part 1 of this series exists. If you pay attention to the warnings I gave in the Understanding Disabilities video, then it's pretty easy to avoid the harmful variants of the tactics I'm about to discuss. So in each case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to describe the tactic, I'm going to state the goal of the tactic, and I'm going to offer some real-world and/or fictional examples of how those tactics can lead to stronger stories. So the first tactic that I want to talk about is what I call the reminder. This is when a character's disability is used to enhance or emphasize some element of the character's backstory. Typically, when you see this tactic used, the character will have developed a disability as the result of some important event in that character's backstory. Something happened to the character and they now carry this reminder with them everywhere they go of this particularly important event in their life. This is a pretty classic and pretty easy way to incorporate characters with disabilities into your story. A warrior who lost their eye in a particularly pitched battle would be a classic example of this tactic in action, and this is a very common tactic when people want to include characters with disabilities in their stories. One very simple fictional example is Captain Hook. Think about Peter Pan's classic villain. Everywhere he goes, he has a physical reminder, a hook instead of a hand, of a particularly important encounter with a crocodile in his backstory. Immediately upon seeing Captain Hook, you know some things about the character, about his backstory, and maybe even a little bit about how his backstory may have affected who he is today. For a more modern example, let's turn to the show Critical Role. One of my favorite characters in that show is Caleb Widogast, who suffers from PTSD related to a very traumatic incident in his character's backstory. I won't dive too deep for people who aren't aware of that story, but let me just say, the episode where that element of his backstory is revealed is probably one of the best scenes I have ever seen acted anywhere ever. Props to Liam O'Brien. For Captain Hook and Caleb Widogast, the disability that they have serves as a reminder of important events in that character's past. The second tactic that I'd like to talk about tonight is what I call the support. And this is when you use a character's disability as a way of defining and developing the relationships that they have with other characters in the story. If you saw part 1 of this series, you may remember that I said that ultimately a disability is just a diagnosis of the particular support that a person needs. Nothing more, nothing less. Well, that statement of needed support is actually fertile ground for good storytelling because it offers you the opportunity to define and develop one character's relationship with another character. And just so we're clear, This particular tactic is not automatically belittling a character. This tactic actually fits very well with one of the core concepts of a lot of RPGs, which is teamwork. In most RPGs, Pathfinder, D&D, Call of Cthulhu, whatever it may be, one of the subtle premises of the game is that characters have to work together and support one another in order to succeed. So the idea of mutual support is already built into pretty much every RPG we play, and as a result, taking the concept of a needed support and using that to develop a relationship is actually a very natural thing in role-playing games. Imagine for a moment a wizard who uses a wheelchair for personal mobility. And then imagine his best friend, a fighter with dyslexia. Both characters have clear strengths, and both characters have clear needs for support, and working together, they become a lot stronger than they would be individually. Looking for ways to take this idea of a need for support and use that to build relationships into your characters can actually bring a lot of depth to your storytelling, and if you want a good example of this in modern media, the How to Train Your Dragon movies are a fantastic example of how to do this well. Hiccup and Toothless the Dragon both end up with a disability. But because they work together and support one another, they are able to do far more than they ever could do alone. That need for one another and that support for one another is actually the basis of an incredible friendship, which leads to an incredible story. So tactic number 3 is what I like to call the challenge, and this is when you use a character's disability to highlight an aspect of the character's personality or their morality system. Essentially to highlight something that is important to that character internally. Oftentimes, people are defined by the challenges that they face and that they overcome. And when you see someone seek out a particular challenge or take on a particularly difficult task, it is often instructive as to what that person cares about, to what that person considers to be important. You can get a good measure of who someone is by the challenges that they are willing to face. That's true for people with disabilities as much as it is for everybody else. People with disabilities still have dreams and goals, and they still have things that they want to accomplish in life. And when you see them seek out challenges and overcome challenges, it reveals their character and their personality much as it would for you and I. Now, I will admit that this storytelling tactic is a little bit different from the previous examples because it is using disability almost as a contrast to highlight that particular aspect of the character, but this can be very effective. A good example of this is Daredevil from Marvel Comics. Daredevil is driven to fight crime both as a lawyer and as a costumed vigilante. And the fact that he rises to these challenges despite being blind is part of what makes that character compelling. We see him take on these challenges, and it means something to see him push so hard where other people might not. Oh, and Daredevil also serves as a pretty clever metaphor for what the ancient Greeks taught us, which is justice is blind. The final tactic that I want to talk about in this video is what I call the purpose. And this is when we use a character's disability to help define their goals. Essentially what happens is because of the character's disability, they are able to discover something that is important to them, they are able to find a purpose or a mission, and the disability ultimately serves as the catalyst for what sends them on their adventures. A few years ago, I heard an account of a lady who lost her vision. She was born normal, but she ended up losing her vision as an adult and became completely blind. And after she lost her vision, she began to realize just how many places didn't have good supports for people who were blind. She would travel around the community and she would go to church, and time and again she would just realize that there were not supports in place for people who were blind, and people who were blind weren't able to participate in things. And upon realizing this, she realized that she could be a voice for people who were blind. she didn't need to be able to see to speak. So now she travels around the community and advocates for people who are blind and for better supports for people who are blind. And if you hear her describe the story of her life, she actually talks about her old useless eyes. The experience of going blind actually helped her find a purpose and a mission in life. Now, I know this may seem strange, but this is actually a tactic you can use when you include characters with disabilities in your story, and this can be a very compelling way to add a character with a disability to your story. Dr. Stephen Strange started out as a normal physician who was consumed with hubris surrounding his skill as a surgeon. However, after he had an accident that interfered with his ability to use his hands, he began a journey of self-discovery that ultimately led to his true purpose, which was to be the Sorcerer Supreme. This is a very easy trope you could copy into a fantasy RPG such as Pathfinder. Imagine an athlete or a warrior who suffers an injury and as a result has to go with their second career choice of wizard school. This is just one more way that you can use a character's disability to enhance their story. But let me turn the conversation over to you. What do you think about these different options? Do any of these tactics sound like characters you might enjoy portraying or adding to your stories? Or are there other tactics that you can think of for adding characters with disabilities into the RPGs that we run? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, like it and share it, subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for being a part of the conversation, and have a wonderful day. Hello everyone, welcome to the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Cinematic Universe post-credit scene. I don't have any serious news for today, I just have something really cool that I want to share. If you have been with this channel for a while, you may remember that last year I participated in the RPG Superstar 2020 competition, and I was actually one of the Platinum Prize winners for that competition. My Salt Stalker monster came in really well in that competition, and as a result of how well I placed in that competition, I actually got to design a family of monsters built around the Salt Stalker. So today, I just wanted to share with you some of the artwork. One of the monsters I got to design in the Salt Stalker family is the Salt Glider. This thing looks amazing. I absolutely love it. So, I just wanted to share it with you guys. I'm so excited to see something I designed coming to life, and just my thanks to the RPG Superstar team. This is just such an honor for me. They have shared with me some of the other artwork, but it's not public yet, so stay tuned to the channel. As soon as I can share some of that other artwork, I totally will. But thank you all for being here, and have a wonderful day.